On Friday, Senator Bernie Sanders appeared on The View to discuss, among other things, his presidential campaign, the Michael Cohen hearing, and reparations. So, days earlier during his CNN town hall, Bernie Sanders advocated for addressing the wealth disparity between the races, between black people and white people, but he did not welcome the term reparations. So, during this appearance on The View, let's see how he did and what he said about it.
Now, the last time you ran, your poll numbers with African Americans were quite low. And you also don't support reparations for slave descendants. Why do you think your poll numbers are low, and why don't you support reparations?
Well, first of all, our poll numbers are not low. I think if you look at polls in the last 6 months, they're quite high among the African American community.
Okay.
And even in 2016, we ended up winning by good margins votes from younger African Americans and Latinos and whites. We did very well among younger African Americans. Look, I happen to believe that at a time of tremendous disparity, the wealth gap, for example, between the white community and the black community is like 10 to 1. Health disparities are terrible. Environmental disparities are terrible. Flint, Michigan comes to mind.
Yeah.
So I think what we have got to do is pay attention to distressed communities, black communities, Latino communities, and white communities all over this country. And as president, I pledge to do that.
Why not support reparations, then?
Well, what do you mean by reparations?
By reparations for slave descendants.
I know, but what does that mean exactly?
Money.
Well, I think that right now our job is to address the crises facing the American people and our communities. And I think there are better ways to do that than just writing out a check.
I think maybe the reason why he doesn't want to touch it, I guess, if you're talking about reparations with the context of there being like checks, because as soon as you kind of go there, then people want to hear a plan. Mm-hmm. People want to hear a number.
Right.
People want to hear a number. People want to know the parameters surrounding who gets the checks and how much.
And how much, right.
And I don't think, well, as far as I know there are some groups out there that have come up with the number, but for the most part, that kind of conversation and narrative is not in there. That specific, the number, as far as like dollar amount, and who specifically. Now, obviously, we know who in general, and just talking about descendants of slavery, but who in regard to like specific people qualify,
right, as
far as age, how you going to do that? So there's a lot of like details that he would then have to explain if he did sign on to that kind of narrative in regard to checks specifically. So then he would then have to go into a more detailed plan, which I don't think is there yet. So I think that's why he's not going there. And like I said, I don't have a problem if people disagree with Bernie's take on reparations. But some of the narratives I've seen after this interview say things like, this proves that Bernie don't care about black people. This proves that Bernie has a problem with black people. I've seen that, and I think that's reaching a bit. But if we're going to apply that standard to Bernie Sanders, we now have to apply that standard to everyone that doesn't think handing out checks is good, and not just presidential candidates. Anyone that's opposed to reparations in the form of checks, regardless of their positions, doesn't care about black people and has a problem with black people.
And that would be the new standard.
And that would be the new standard. You see what I'm saying?
I don't have a problem with what he said. I honestly do not have a problem with what he said. Like you were trying to make the case. When you're talking about an actual monetary give out to some degree, when you're talking about payments being made to descendants of slavery, that gets tricky because, again, you know the general idea of, like you said, the general idea of who would get it, but the actual technique, the actual process of actually getting that done.
That's money, dog.
Like, what age, are you going to cap it at an age limit, or is it going to be babies too?
That's what I'm saying.
It's like, it gets really tricky.
Yeah.
For me, I can say myself that I do support reparations, but my definition does not match a lot of other people's definitions. So I do want money being invested in black people, but I don't think necessarily enriching individual black people is going to do the job. We want systematic change. We want something that changes the system so that we're not going to be faced with this same type of situation years later. Like, I want something done with our communities. I want something done with the education system. I want something done so that we can actually access healthcare, that we can actually use the healthcare. All right. I want something done so that Flint, Michigan never happens again. And I noticed that Bernie Sanders talked about Flint, Michigan. So what I want is I want money being invested to actually change the system so that the disparity between unemployment rates between white and black people's unemployment rate is about double the rate of white people. I want something done about that. When you're talking about just a check, I can understand somebody wanting that, but that's not going to do anything to actually change the system. And when we talked about Marianne Williamson, she has the most well-defined plan as it relates to reparations. Mm-hmm. And even she does not call for actual individual black people being like dispersed a check.
I believe $100 billion given to a council that would apply this money to economic projects and educational projects of renewal for that population is simply a debt to be paid.
So when you hear that, again, now if you go onto her website, Marianne2020.com, she goes into what her idea is about reparations. And again, she just stated right there, $100 billion. And it's, of course, there's going to be a council that that is going to determine how that money is appropriated. But I don't think she's talking about giving you $30,000 or $50,000 or giving this individual over here $100,000. No, change the system. And I think that's going to benefit generations to come. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's what we want.
Yeah, because at the rally in Chicago, Bernie dug into a lot of that. Racial disparities, maternal mortality, criminal justice reform in regard to cash bail. But I guess since he doesn't view handing out checks as a reparative option, it means he's deaf and blind to the struggles of black people, right. I guess. Right. And will a check deal with all those things? You see what I'm saying? No. Like if we're talking about criminal justice reform as far as cash bail, policing, the drug war, just the racial wealth gap and all that, police brutality, and the list goes on, is giving a black person a check going to address those systematic issues? I just think it's a bit lofty for people to think that there's one guy who can even fix that, because it's like it requires like a whole cultural shift, a cultural change for all that stuff to go away, or to at least advance in a way that has a meaningful impact.
Bernie Sanders seems to be advocating for doing something about poverty, okay? And yes, he does state that we need to address specific situations as it relates to the black community, people of color. Definitely, because again, those people have been disenfranchised for a very, very long time. So yes, you need to target it. So that's what I'm saying. See, a targeted approach, that speaks to me as reparations. The whole check business, if you hand out checks, no matter what amount they are, unless they're like $1 million, which that's never gonna happen. But if you're handing out like thousands of dollars to black people, okay? So what's gonna happen? Maybe black people have enough money to
pay off their mortgage
or get a mortgage. Maybe they have enough money to send their kid to a better school. Maybe they have enough money to start a business. Maybe they have enough money to send their kid to higher education institute, right? Or a facility, something, a university, a college, whatever. So that's all great, but how is that money going to prevent Flint from happening again? How is that money going to help impoverished communities? How is that going to help drive businesses to these communities? Do you understand? We need systemic change, systematic change. We need change at the ground level. The ground level is not handing out money to be put into your bank account. That
seems like a practical approach, because you're looking at the bigger picture. Like, what is the result going to be? You know what I'm saying? What is the result going to be?
If you want to look at the larger picture, then yeah, that's not going to do it. That's just not going to get it done.